Hello, welcome back to another episode of Sowing in Scripture. Today we're going to be covering the book of Daniel, chapters 5 and 6. I'd like to remind you, if you are enjoying these videos, please hit that thumbs up like button at the bottom. Also, be sure to subscribe to this video and be sure to ring that notification bell. Remember, YouTube is not going to let you know that these videos are posting unless you hit that notification bell. And be sure to make sure you have it marked as all. This way you know when all the videos come out. Still no sponsor, but that's okay. So, again, this is called Sowing in Scripture. Let's go ahead and sow into people. Share this Bible study with others. Be sure you're sharing the Word of God with others. You never know who needs to hear a word from God, and that's how we sow into people to help them develop a deeper relationship with Christ. So we're going to go ahead and just dive right on in. Again, we're covering the book of Daniel. This is going to be chapters 5 and 6. So let's go ahead and begin with chapter 5. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. So the years between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar total only 10 years, but are filled with murder, intrigue, conspiracy, and political decline. Nebuchadnezzar was succeeded by his son, Merodach, or the evil Merodach, who had reigned for only 2 years when he was murdered by his brother-in-law, Neriglissar. After a brief reign, Neriglissar died, leaving the kingdom in the hands of his son, Labashi Marduk. The latter lasted only 2 months before being killed by an assassin and succeeded by Nabonidus. Nabonidus, who was probably the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, reigned for some 16 years. Although he left the kingdom in the hands of his son, Belshazzar, for much of the time, Nabonidus was able to restore a measure of glory to Babylon. Belshazzar ruled as king during the last years of Babylon. It is not evident until the last chapter, but while Belshazzar was feasting in revelry, the city was surrounded by the Persian army. Belshazzar considered the city unassailable because of its massive walls and therefore felt confident to hold a banquet in the face of military threat. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall, near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. The plaster wall, archaeologists have unearthed a room in the site of ancient Babylon, located in Iraq, that is plastered and measures 165 feet by 55 feet. It may very well have been Belshazzar's banquet hall. So there is evidence that this plaster wall did, in fact, exist, or possibly exist. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak, and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck. He will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale." The queen they're referring to here was probably Belshazzar's mother or grandmother, since his wives were at the feast. She was likely Nebuchadnezzar's widow and served as the queen mother. "There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now, I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered the king, You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. So he's saying, all that stuff, you can keep it, but I'll do you this favor. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. And those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Mene comes from a verb meaning to number. Tekel comes from a verb meaning to weigh. And Parsin comes from a verb meaning to divide. Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Parsin, or Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then, at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. He was called the third highest ruler in the kingdom because Belshazzar and Nabonidus were already co-rulers. Critics of the Bible in past times suggested that Daniel erred greatly in portraying Belshazzar as Babylon's final king. However, the finding of several official tablets dealing with Belshazzar has shown that he was assuredly Nabonidus' son, ruling as a second ruler in the kingdom. So two co-rulers, so 1 and 2, and then that would make Daniel 3. Accordingly, when Daniel translated and explained the enigmatic words on the wall, he could be made but third ruler. The discovery of the Nabonidus Chronicle affirmed the accuracy of the biblical account, which other historians had long forgotten. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. Babylon was particularly invincible, but according to extra-biblical records, The Persians were able to divert the Euphrates River, which ran through the city, and thus walked in through the shallow riverbed. The capture of the city is well attested in ancient records, from both the Babylonian and Persian annals. Though neither mentions the slaying of Belshazzar, he must have died in a palace skirmish. In essence, the city was taken without a fight. So Belshazzar is inside, he's feasting, having parties, not paying much attention to the fact that the Persian army has them surrounded. The Persians infiltrated the palace and took over. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Darius the Mede, or Midian, mentioned here and in the next chapter, has been variously identified. Since there is no extra biblical evidence for his existence, critics have charged the book with historical blunder here. Others, however, have sought to explain the reference in one of three ways. One, the name may be another name for Cyrus. It is possible to translate in chapter 6, verse 28 as in the reign of Darius, even in the reign of Cyrus. 2. Others suggest that Darius may be another name for Ugbaru. Sorry, there are no pronunciations. I've tried to look them up. I cannot find pronunciations for these ones, so I'm just doing the best I can. The name for Ugbaru, the governor of Gutim, who, according to Babylonian records, led the Persian army in the capture of Babylon. He was subsequently appointed as ruler of Babylon by Cyrus. 3. Another explanation is that although Ugbaru conquered Babylon, another man named Gubaru was given rule over Babylon by Cyrus. Gubaru and Darius would be alternate names for the same person. So a lot like how you have Daniel, his name is Belteshazzar, multiple names for the same person. It could be that case as well for Darius also being Cyrus. Whichever view is correct, there is certainly no need to charge Daniel with historical error. This Darius is not to be confused with the later Persian king Darius the Great. So that was chapter 5. Let's go ahead and move on to chapter 6. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So at this point, Daniel was 80 years of age, and yet he still was on his knees thanking God and asking for his guidance and help. It shows you're never too old to pray. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or your decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. So he's been sealed in. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty." His angel is perhaps the angel of Yahweh, the pre-incarnate Christ. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of the kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the king. He is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So that is the end of chapter 6. So again, if you were with us during our journey through Esther, again, that was also in Persia. And at that time, Haman had gotten King Xerxes to issue a decree condemning the Jews. And the only way that a decree it can't be lifted. It's set in stone. It's permanent. But the only way that you can actually do anything counter to a decree is to create a counter decree. You have to create another decree that says, okay, well, this one supersedes the one that came before it. So that's why they're saying in here, issued a decree, and it's the law. It cannot be rescinded, because those are their laws. They can't take it back once it's been put out there, and the king has put a signet ring on it and said, "I'm sealing this with yes, that's my approval. I say this is how it's going to be." That's how they did their laws back then. So the only way to counteract that would be to do a counter decree, which would supersede the previous decree. I know, kind of weird, but that's how they did it back in Persia. So that's what we're looking at there when they're talking about it couldn't be undone. So I hope you're enjoying these Bible studies. And again, if you feel compelled to, go ahead and share these with other people. Be sure to be sowing into other people as well. You don't necessarily be needing to share these videos to sow into somebody else. I mean, you could be walking down the street and see somebody and be sowing into a complete stranger, into your family, to your friends, to your neighbors. It could be in any way, any form. God uses us in so many different ways to be able to sow into other people. But just don't be closed off to that. Make sure you're open to where God is leading you and who he is guiding you to sow into. Also, be sure to be sowing into yourself a little bit. Some refreshing of his word, get into the Bible, do some extra Bible study. Even though you're watching these videos, make sure you're actually getting into your word also. Don't take my word for it. Don't take the study Bible's word for it. Get into the word for yourself and see what God is saying to you today. So that's going to be it. Join us next week as we get into chapters 7 and 8 in the book of Daniel. We'll see you then.